Last week, US President Donald Trump offered his prescription to lower drug prices for Americans, import them from Canada. Joining us now on what the implications of such an approach might be in Montreal, Quebec, Andre Picard, public health reporter and columnist for the Globe and Mail. And here in our studio, Joelle Walker, Vice President of Public Affairs at the Canadian Pharmacists Association. Welcome to you both.
Welcome.
Andre, welcome back to the show. And Joelle, it's your first time. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
So I think a lot of us saw the footage of U.S. Senator and Democratic presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders when he made the trip to Windsor with a group of Americans who crossed the border from Detroit to buy insulin in Canada. Joelle, why do Americans want access to Canadian drugs?
Well, I think it's important to know that, there's actually a long history of Americans coming up to Canada. It's been happening for over 10 years. And oftentimes it is because medications can be less expensive here in Canada. And the example that certainly Bernie Sanders highlighted was of patients who are looking for insulin that is less expensive here in Canada than in the US. So people who live nearby the border probably see it as, an opportunity to kind of get some medication that they're life-saving and that they need.
If it's been happening for this long, why do you think that now I think more people are paying attention to it?
Well, the question of having individuals coming over, sometimes they're caravans, they call themselves caravans of patients, those people are not putting a big strain on Canada's drug supply. Mm-hmm. They come in, they get a 3-month supply usually because that's what's allowed to go back in the States. And then, but the bigger question now is there's a lot of legislation that's happening in the States at the state level and federally. I think at the last count there was more than 20 pieces of legislation that actually would allow more wholesale importation or online importation for personal use for Americans. And our concern, has been that Canada has a lot of issues with our drug supply as it is in terms of, the availability. There's a lot of shortages. And so having a population that's 10 times our size, kind of looking to have access to Canadian medications could put some pressure on our existing supply.
For Canadians, in order for you to get prescriptions, you need a prescription from your doctor. Andre, I just wanted to get more into the details that President Trump is proposing. Can you fill us in?
Yeah, so he's proposing a couple of things. One is to allow mass importations, so you could buy, the companies or organizations there could buy drugs on a large scale. And as Joelle mentioned, this has been going on for a long time, but on a small scale, sort of busloads of seniors coming up, people with diabetes, and we can handle that in Canada, in those border towns. But it's this notion that the state of Florida could buy antidepressants for the entire state would be a whole different matter. So he would allow that on a trial basis, so sort of pilot project type thing. And the second part of the proposal is a stranger one. It would be allow the pharmaceutical companies to essentially sell drugs at a lower price, a price they sell in a third country. So why they would do that is beyond me, but so there's those two aspects to what's being proposed.
Is this a popular proposal with voters?
Well, I think simplicity is very popular these days in U.S. politics, and this is a very simplistic notion. Drugs are cheap in Canada, so let's buy them in the U.S., rather than addressing their domestic problem, which is a lack of drug price controls.
Well, in your view, why do you think that the Americans are not addressing their own drug policies and choosing to come here instead?
Well, I think it's has a lot to do with politics. They believe in freedom and not being socialists who set prices, et cetera. So there's a bit of hypocrisy there. I think the other thing is this is very political. These proposals have happened time and time again. I remember covering one 20 years ago, 10 years ago. So these things come up oddly, maybe coincidentally before an election in the US, and then they can kind of die off. And that's what I suspect will happen this time as well.
I'm thinking too that this might be ruffling some feathers with the pharmaceutical companies in the States. No?
Well, the pharma companies are not going to be too keen on this. It's essentially asking them to make less money off their drugs. And it's also asking them to do fairly bizarre things. So we don't manufacture a lot of drugs in Canada. So take a company would be, Canada would be buying its drugs in the US and then being asked to re-export them to the US at a lower price. Again, why would you do that as a company? There's not a lot of logic to that. And no one thinks they will go along with this willingly.
And Joelle?
Well, Canada's drug market, we have to remember we're sort of a fairly small country in comparison to the States. So we make up about, I think it's less than 2% of the global market. And most manufacturing companies are not actually based in Canada. So to Andre's point, there's a little point, there's a little bit of importation, reimportation, and our allotment of medications are sort of predetermined based on historical use, right? So how we look at things over the last 3 or 5 years will sort of determine what's allotted to Canada. So that's kind of how it happens right now and how we're allotted that medication. And part of the challenge is that we're not necessarily in a position. A lot of people say, well, why can't we just manufacture more medication and that'll solve our problem? But manufacturing tends not to happen in Canada. It tends to happen in other countries, and we don't have that control over the supply chain. So our concern is that it'll sort of put pressure on existing issues that we have. And we did a survey last year at the end of 2018 where we asked Canadians if they had experienced a drug shortage, and because we've been hearing that from a lot of pharmacists that they were frustrated that they're seeing a lot of drug shortages, and 1 in 4 Canadians said that they had experienced a drug shortage either personally or a family member, and that number actually was very high in comparison to what we were expecting. And we have pharmacists who say that up to 50% of their inventory, when they put their orders in every week, is actually comes back as saying, cannot be filled. So to us, this is a big problem. And even if we're talking, I don't think we're concerned that 300 million Americans are all of a sudden going to be using our medications, but even a small percentage of Americans could still kind of put a lot of that pressure on a fairly small market.
And you mentioned that the drugs are being manufactured in the States. So I still don't understand why they just don't, why they would sell them to us and then come back and get them.
Well, they're actually manufactured quite globally. Some of them are manufactured in the States. Some of them are manufactured, in China and other places. So, to Andre's point, it is a complex issue, and drug manufacturers make decisions based on their kind of business needs and where they see attractive markets. So, whether or not they want to support sort of that importation, I think, is a big question mark.
I think I know the answer to this question, Andre, but I'm still going to ask you: is it a good idea to allow Americans to import drugs from Canada?
Well, we should be open-minded, I think, for people who are coming on an individual basis with needing things like insulin at 1/10 of the price, and I think we can handle that. But this notion of massive importation, no, I think we should even take legislative action to prevent that. And if we know, again, if I bring you back in history, this is a big issue back before the 2006 election in Canada. And in 2005, the Liberals brought forward legislation that banned mass exportation of drugs to the US. And I suspect that's going to happen in the very near future.
Joelle, how do Canadian drug prices compare to the rest of the world?
Well, there's different reports that have come out. I think some of the more recent ones are showing that a trend towards, Canada actually negotiating lower drug prices. So where I think historically we were kind of one of the higher drug prices, things are coming down, and we've just had a fairly large announcement last year around generic drugs, bringing those drug prices down through the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. So we're sort of mid-range at this point, from my understanding of various ones. But again, the attractiveness for Americans looking upwards is that Canada has a safe supply of medications. We have a robust safety protocols through Health Canada, making sure that medications are approved. So they sort of see us as that kind of safe market to go to. But there are potential unintended consequences in terms of availability. And if Americans are starting to hear all of a sudden, oh, it's legal, and because you see some of those headlines, especially in those states that have passed it, they may be tempted to actually go online now, even while it's not permitted, and end up stumbling upon what are considered to be illegal or unregulated online pharmacies who are selling, medications that are not Health Canada approved and sometimes counterfeit. So there are some risks to patients who are looking for those medications and who are not necessarily familiar with the Canadian pharmacy landscape.
The Food and Drug Administration has a role in deciding what drugs are safe. What's their position on this?
Well, the HHS Secretary Azar, who's responsible for that agency, is the one who introduced the legislation, or it's not legislation, it's a sort of proposal that Andre discussed with sort of the two pathways to importation. So there seems to be some support at that level, and whereas in previous years we weren't concerned that it would pass, it sort of has gotten a lot of state approval. Some of those bills have been signed into law by governors, and now we also have approval from the federal administration, both the president and the secretary, to sort of say this is something we're looking into. So while it hasn't passed, and we want to make sure people are, aware of that there's a real potential, and we want to make sure that we're prepared and not at the 11th hour trying to figure out a plan to put in place that could, itself cause unintended consequences for access for Canadians.
And Democrats are supporting this as well?
Well, again, it's maybe an election issue, so it's maybe predetermined, too early to tell. We certainly know that Bernie Sanders supports it. As to others, not everybody sort of, said anything about that, but we'll see where it goes.
Andre, I want to talk to you about drug prices. How does Canada determine the prices of prescription drugs?
Well, we have a legislation. We have a body called the PMPRB, the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, and they essentially use a formula. Doesn't apply to every single drug, but roughly we pay the median price of 7 comparator countries. So we take these 7 countries, we look at their list drug prices, and then we set ourselves in the middle. Canadians like doing everything in the middle, and that's what we do. Now the result is we have, according to the latest PMPRB report, the 4th highest drug prices in the world for brand name drugs. And while they don't regulate generic drug prices, we now have the 11th highest generic drug prices in the world. We used to be number 1, but as was mentioned earlier, there was dramatic changes in that last year, cuts of 60, 70%. So we're up among the higher drug prices in the world, but it is regulated. And the other thing to remember is list prices are not necessarily what's paid. So there's a list price, that's the maximum price, and then you negotiate. And there's a lot of activity in Canada about more joint buying between provinces, et cetera, to bring down prices. So if you take some prices, some drugs we pay only about 1/10 of the list price, but we don't know, that tends to be secret.
Well, if Canada has some of the highest prices in the world, why do the Americans want to buy from us?
Well, I think as Joel mentioned, because we're a safe supply, because under their law, drugs can only be purchased from FDA-approved facilities, which we have in Canada, which they have in the U.S., which we intend to buy from. So it's the safety of supply that they're selling it on. And it's interesting, the U.S. pharma companies, their big opposition to these bills is not about money. They don't want to draw attention to their profits. They're saying this is about safety. We don't want people bringing in unsafe drugs. And if you go back in history, there's a history of Canadian online pharmacies selling drugs, counterfeit drugs, cancer drugs, and the FDA did a huge crackdown a few years back. Many online pharmacies were shut down.
I guess this is why I was going to ask, why not Mexico? Why not get the drugs from Mexico?
Well, I guess there'd be other political issues there as well, and I think they would probably send them packing pretty quickly. But again, it's about this notion of we're doing something, but we're going to a safe country and everything will be okay.
What would happen to our prices if we did open the market to them? Joelle?
Well, I think those are the long-term effects. It's hard to kind of pinpoint, right? So if the demand is greater and we don't do anything in Canada to regulate this, who knows what that could do? It could drive up prices or possibly, I suppose, reduce prices. But we don't know that. And because those pieces of legislation are still also trying to, they might look at different aspects of importation. So some are wholesale, some are personal, some are both. So there's, again, a lot of unknown, and why it really is important for Health Canada to work with stakeholders, with patient groups, et cetera, just to make sure that we have a plan in place and that we're actually thinking through what those long-term effects might be. Depending on what exact pathway the government decides to allow in the States or not. As Andre mentioned, this may not actually ever come to fruition. But if it does, we want to be prepared. We want to make sure that we're not creating a situation that's hard to put back in the box once it actually starts to happen. And Andre mentioned those, illegal online pharmacies that were selling things. Again, those can be very tricky to shut down, particularly in this day and age where the pharmacies pretend that they're Canadian. They have a Canadian flag on it. They call themselves something with the word Canada in it. People assume that they are, and you start to look at the address at the very bottom, and it's actually maybe even in the States. It might be in a very different country. So, that might create that environment for that to flourish, and it can be very difficult from a law enforcement point of view to shut those down. So we want to make sure that we're educating Americans as well to make sure that they're not falling for those, and that we're not kind of allowing a system to grow that might promote that and unknowingly.
Is there an opportunity for an economic opportunity here for Canada because we have something that Americans want? Andre?
No, we hear that argument often. Hey, why doesn't Canada just make more drugs? But as we've said earlier, we don't manufacture many of those. Our greatest economic threat is that not that our drug prices go up, but there just not be an availability, and then we'd have to purchase who knows where, and it's not easy to ramp up production of any one drug. So I think there's nothing but bad in this proposal for Canada.
What kind of drugs are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about just about any kind of drug, although they have put some parameters in their proposals around things like biologics because they require kind of more secure chains of distribution. So you need to keep them cold, for example. So
what are those?
Biologics or biosimilars, for example. But the majority of medications would sort of be open right now. People are coming up for insulin. You don't need a prescription for insulin in Canada, but it could.
Is insulin a biologic?
It's not a biologic.
Okay.
Well, it's a version of a biologic actually, but you can have a longer supply. But we're talking biologics tend to be those really expensive medications that you use for you have them infused and that sort of thing. And there's more difficulty in maintaining that sort of the product, the integrity of the product over long periods of time and having transported. So in Canada, if you're transporting it, for example, it needs to arrive at the pharmacy. The pharmacy needs to put it in a cold area. But you have high blood pressure medications, antidepressants. All of those have been short in Canada recently, and so pressure on that supply might actually exacerbate the availability for Canadians.
I'm sure people who are watching this who've experienced a situation where they weren't able to get the drug that they needed are paying attention to this issue. Andre, what kind of drugs are currently in a shortage in Canada?
Well, it's a very long list. There's Health Canada keeps a website, and it just grows with each passing week. Just this past week, we wrote a story about 3 really essential cancer drugs being severely short. So these are not nothing important. These are very important drugs. We had a big one last year on EpiPens. Kids couldn't get their EpiPens. Lots of epilepsy drugs, you name it. There's shortages. And as we've mentioned a few times, this is a really complex issue. It's not about the US buying stuff. That would just exacerbate it. But it's about source supplies, about the chain of how things move around the world. And there's not any ready or easy solution to these shortage problems.
I was going to ask you, what causes drug shortages in Canada?
Yeah, mostly it's the base elements. So you need to bring in a product to make a drug, and those products come from, who knows, Kashmir in India, and there's a war going on there. So there's all kinds of these little elements that go in that prevent a drug from being made. There's been crackdowns on how drugs are manufactured, and that's forced some plants to shut down, and that's delayed production by a year. So there's all kinds of elements that go into these shortages.
Well, if President Trump wants this to happen, some states and the feds want this to happen, how likely is it to happen, Joelle?
Well, again, this is, Andre suggested that in the past years, in the last, 10 years ago, it didn't actually go that far. It's hard to know if it's likely or not at this point. I guess my point in all of this would be to say it's actually gotten a lot further than it has in the past. And that's what really concerns us is that, there's really concrete legislation. There's a lot of political will down in the States for these things to happen, both federally and at the state level. There's actually a lot of public support for this. So, and the president announced with his secretary last week a bit of a concrete proposal. So, again, will this happen in 6 months, a year? The details are still unknown, but there's a lot more reality put to this than there has been in the past. So hopefully it doesn't come about. Hopefully Canada's prepared to deal with it. We think there's a real opportunity for Canada to work out some kind of plan right now, and we'll be able to avoid it.
We know what the American president wants. Andre, do you think that the Canadian government is responding to this well, as quickly enough as it should?
Well, I think they've been quiet to date. I think it's not wanting to pick a fight with Trump, but I think it's getting to the point where they have to do something. And I see us going back to what we did more than a decade ago and sort of ban exportation. So the analogy I use is sort of Trump is out there being the big bad wolf, and he's huffing and puffing. And what Canada has to do is make sure that we have a brick house and not a straw house. So we have to prepare ourselves for the worst case scenario and make sure that Canadians' drug supply is protected.
We've talked a little bit about there's an election in the U.S. Our election is in October. Could this importation of drugs become an election issue for Canadians?
Well, I think yes, absolutely, and I think that's why we're going to see legislation in very short order.
And Joelle?
I mean, the survey sort of speaks for themselves. Like, people are really concerned about drug shortages, and knowing that this could potentially make those worse is really a problem. So, when we're talking about drug availability for Canadians, it's really important that this become part of our larger drug policy, programs and proposals. So we have, right now we're talking a little bit about pharmacare and other changes too, and I don't think they're necessarily connected, except for to say that, we want to make sure that our policies are kind of comprehensive, and the availability of medications by shortages is so significant that we want to be able to make sure that that's an important part of those conversations. So I think it probably will be an election issue, particularly if this legislation in the states it moves forward or there's more emphasis on it.
Joelle, thank you so much for being here. And Andre, thank you very much for being with us from Montreal. We appreciate both you helping us understand this complex issue. Thank you.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario, and by viewers like you. Thank you.